Good morning. Well, I was kind of chuckling to myself during the introduction because Daniel and I are friends. And I had no idea, actually, that he'd moved into the space where his life had been made into a movie. But if you met Daniel, you would know that that just had to be because he's quite a character. And he and I met through our travels and connection to the world of Toltec ritual and through the space Teotihuacan, where I taught for 9 years, which is the pyramids outside of Mexico City. And I met him, of all things, in Tennessee at a mutual friend's place. And I was drawn to him. I had never seen his picture. So sometimes, you go in a room and you just feel like you need to sit next to that person or you just engage in conversation. Well, lo and behold, I just felt drawn to him. And we sat down and he looked at me and I looked at him and we started kind of chatting. And soon enough, he began telling me these stories. And I didn't realize I also do that. I just storytell. I think actually I may storytell for a living. And I realized after about the second story that he was the primary speaker for the event that we were both sitting at, and that I was going on to do something else, and he realized who I was. And there to be sitting in the front row listening for the introduction of myself today, to be staring actually out at his name and thinking, that's why we're here. That's why this happened at this group on this day, is because life is small and we're all interconnected. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life and my journey, beyond and back and beyond and back. Sharon and I were speaking a little bit last night. Sometimes people are drawn to listening to me speak, not because I'm, all that in a piece of toast, but because I have flatlined 8 times. So for me, crossing back over and back over and back over and back over is apparently a groove in the road. Sharon was a little bit worried last night when I was getting ready for bed, wanting to ensure that I wasn't going to do that at her house. I didn't do it really intentionally the other time, so I assured her I would wake up this morning and come and give this speaking engagement. So, I always like to tailor what I have to say to the groups where I am, and it's a little hard to do that when you go to a group where you don't really know anybody. I guess I'll start at the beginning. I came into the world to parents that had their own plans and their own issues and their own way. And when I was born, my mom had a medical emergency, and her parents were told that she wasn't going to survive the birth. She was transfused with, she's ground zero for Hep C. So my mom was transfused with hepatitis infected blood that they later determined she was in fact the first Hep C in the United States. And unfortunately she's Rh negative, and it was the wrong blood type as well, so she became very, very ill. And as a result, I was placed into the care of my grandmother, and I imprinted like a duckling to my grandmother. So when I think about who raised me, despite the fact that my mom did survive, miraculously, and I did live with my mom and dad, I thought of my grandparents as my true parents because they are my earliest memory. Excuse me. And it's interesting to have a set of sort of spiritual parents and a set of birth parents, and to go back and forth and try to understand what that's like. And I think from the moment I was born, I was crossing the veil. I was in that space where that energy was really flowing around me because my mother flatlined. I mean, she bled out and had to be resuscitated. So I was in that space from the very beginning. And from what I know now through my life, I'd say I probably came from that space. I probably was used to the journey. But I think I'm predisposed, apparently, to the comfort of traveling back and forth. So from very early on, I knew there was something different about me. I didn't know exactly what it was. I didn't know at the time that my mom is clairsentient. It means she just knows stuff. It's not like she sees dead people. She just knows stuff. And if she walks into a house and starts interacting with people she doesn't know, slowly but surely, she just knows stuff about them, not from conversation, but from what exists energetically. So I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I was 34. It might have been helpful, actually, for my mom to come out to me as clairsentient because I was born clairvoyant. And I was telling Sharon that I did a lot of poking when I was in school early on because I couldn't tell the difference between people who had human form and people who didn't. So I didn't trust that, you actually had a body and you were going to respond to me with a live voice and that you would be there, say, the next day and the next day and the next day in the classroom or whatever. So that probably separated me a little bit apart from the other kids as I was sort of poking my way through to make sure that people were in bodies. And I didn't know how else to tell the difference. I also didn't realize that other kids didn't do that. Except that they probably didn't like that if I poked them. I just didn't know. So by the time I was about 4, it became crystal clear that there was something very unusual about me. We went to a parochial school. I was in kindergarten. And that first year, I got to play Mother Mary in the holiday special extravaganza, and my mother was so lovely. She made me a blue gown and had this gold cord, and I just felt ethereal. I just knew that this was who I was, And afterwards, I used to love to take my costume with me in my backpack to school, and recess would come and I'd put it on, and I would play what I thought was Mother Mary. And slowly but surely, the kindergarten playground was sort of the backyard of a home that was no longer in use. I didn't know that story until quite a while later. If you want to read about that, there might be a story about it in one of the books back there. It was apparently a cemetery, a personal cemetery, but we would go play over there, and I would love to stand on top of these stones, and I'd raise my hands in the air, and I would be calling to the gods, and I guess that's what I was doing. And the children would race around me. So apparently this got back to my parents at some point in time. After I'd done it a few times, I think the priest was a little bit worried about what it might mean. They were kind of confused by me. And, my parents kind of were mortified. My mother's British, and she was saying, don't do that, that's weird. And I'd say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And my brother's kind of looking askance at me like, oh man, she is just odd. Well, what I learned about my brother very quickly was that my brother is able to move things with his mind, and I witnessed it plenty of times. He's a physician in LA now. He's also a professional magician, and when he's doing late night rounds, he doesn't do magic, he just levitates stuff. So he cheats. So I realized there was something, it wasn't just me, there was something odd about our family. So, knowing that, but not really knowing it with your mind. You grow up, your mind gets better and better at processing these things and makes sense of things. So as a child, I just felt isolated. I felt unusual, not like the other kids. And I knew my brother was unusual as well, but that seemed more like a party trick. He didn't have to poke anybody to find out if they were human. So the other thing is that we grew up in a haunted house, not in a bad way. We just had other people without bodies living in the house, and we got used to them because, they lived in the house too. And actually, lots of people interacted with them, not in a good way. That scared them. They didn't live there every day. So again, started to feel more and more unusual, like I couldn't really relate to other kids. So if you've had any experience with that, or you know anything about that, what happens is you begin to be in a bubble. You begin to become more isolated over time, and that can lead you into avenues that probably aren't healthy or good for you. And people can see that you're odd, that you're different, and that maybe you need some extra special attention. Unfortunately for me, the people who could see that were perpetrators. So over time, I became victimized by people who could see that I was different, that I was more isolated, and that I probably wouldn't tell. And that was a bad thing, unfortunately, and it weighed on me. And it was very difficult to be victimized and be in that bubble and not be able to tell and not be able to talk about it, and to have it begin to weigh on my heart and to leave me feeling even more different and more frightened and alone in the world. And that just became very difficult to survive in that realm. And as I grew older and went into elementary and then into junior high school, I began to really notice the ways in which I felt different. As other girls and boys were starting to interact, I noticed that caused me to feel angst and anxiety and discomfort. And eventually, I was so filled up with just the desire not to be in the situation anymore that on an errant thought, I walked in, I was 11 years old. I walked into the family kitchen. I think my mom was still in her bedroom. My brother was away. And I pulled out a casserole from the refrigerator, I think in my mind as if to heat something up, but really below the surface, I let the Pyrex dish drop and I slashed my wrist. And I knew at that moment in time my intention was to die. Luckily for me, it bled a lot. It was very painful. I didn't slash the other side, and my mom walked in. And I was able to quickly dispatch that I had dropped the casserole. I covered it up. I felt even more alone, more isolated, and now I couldn't relate to any of my peers. So you could tell it's kind of a perfect storm. So as I tried to kind of deal with myself, I started to try to understand, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get through this? How am I going to get through this life where I'm uncomfortable, I'm alone, I have these deep, dark secrets that nobody knows? What am I going to do for myself? And I kind of fixated on the Bible. And one Bible in particular. My mom had had a Bible as a girl, and it was sitting on my bedroom shelf. And I thought, just that one thing. I'm going to just focus on that one thing. And so I started carrying it around. So you can tell what happened next, right? I mean, now the kids didn't want to be around me at all, because now I'm odd, I'm isolated, and I'm carrying around a Bible. So even the very devout Christian and Catholic girls and boys were kind of looking at me like, yeah, we're not walking around with a Bible in our hands. So unfortunately for me, it did isolate me further until I found little people, little types of connections that I could make. And one of them was a guy who actually lives here locally. I should have told him I was coming today. He generally goes to LA on the weekends to see his fiance. But he and I have known each other for 42 years. And he had some similar kinds of struggles, and we met in 6th grade. And we were just probably odd enough to be good friends. And he probably helped keep me alive just by allowing me a sense of connection in the world. By the time I was 15, though, I think I was probably a pretty good target. I probably had a pretty good target on my head, just like the target sign, I think I could probably be spotted as somebody who probably could be manipulated. I mean, I was a smart girl, don't get me wrong. But I dare say that I was somebody that could be spotted. And spotted I was by a local cartel that I didn't even know existed. And I didn't even really know that world. We were from a good family, a good Christian family. I got straight A's, I kept to myself, and this lovely man connected up with me, seemed to take an interest in me, and wanted to be my boyfriend. And I was so excited for the attention that I thought, oh, finally, a boyfriend. Wow. And he was older, and he was different, and I was so excited, and I fell for it. And I fell for it until I was basically the property of this local cartel. And the things that happened inside that world were really scary, and were not things that anybody should have to go through. And unfortunately, they created a level of despondency in me that I just realized I just couldn't stay alive any longer. It just was too much to handle. And so I had, unfortunately, discovered at 17 that I was pregnant. As careful as I had tried to be, I was pregnant. So pregnant and property in a world that just felt to me like so much worse than the mob you could ever even imagine. And I thought, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I knew that my mom had Valium in the medicine cabinet. And one night I came home and I opened up that cabinet and I grabbed that bottle and I opened it up and I swallowed the whole thing. Now, just an FYI, I'm not wearing a red band today, but I'm allergic to opiates. Didn't know that at the time. Apparently, it's just something that I don't do well with. It stops my heart. It's a weird thing. It's supposed to just put you in respiratory distress if you're allergic. No, I just code. But I didn't know that, and it's probably good that I didn't know that, because what I remember at that point in time is turning around and taking the pills, putting the cap down, and looking up in the mirror and looking at myself. And the self looking back at me was dead. I just thought, I don't know how else to describe that. I looked at this girl who was ashen and who looked like me, but just seemed like there was no soul, no energy, no spirit left. I mean, I am a vibrant, energetic person. My kids love to call me the Energizer Bunny, and this was just devoid of that. And in my memory, I turned around and I vomited into the toilet, sat on the floor for a few moments, walked into my bedroom, laid down on the bed, and went to sleep. And as time wore through, my memory shifted to getting up and going to the local, to my mother's church, which is it's Westminster Cathedral in Pasadena, and to spending the night talking to one of the priests, ministers, and then driving home in the early morning and going back to bed. That was what I remember. So about 5 years ago, I am sitting in a conference for folks who have had NDEs at the request of a friend, and I'm there, I'm listening to the speaker, and it's like 32 years later after this has happened. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, the bubble pops. And for those of you who have had NDEs, you may know what that means. For those of you who haven't, the bubble is sometimes information that just sits there and waits for you. And then when you're really ready to know what happened, it just pops, and it delivers up the data to you. So I'm surrounded, like 200 people, maybe 250, surrounded by people. I'm sitting at a desk, right, listening to a speaker, and the bubble pops for me. And I realize that the memory was it was a false memory, it was a convenient lie. It's what my brain could tolerate at the time. And what actually happened was that I took the pills, I walked into my bedroom, I laid down on the floor, and died. Now, I guess for people who have been clinically dead, if you have the luck of having a alarm clock on your bedroom nightstand, you can look and check the time. And I remember seeing the time as I was laying down on the ground, and then I left my body. And I entered that tween space, and through space and time, I traveled to someplace that held very sort of special, positive memories for me. I loved going with my mom. This was not my church. My church was my dad's church, the High Episcopal Church. But I loved my mom's church because it was this huge cathedral, and it was really beautiful. And I had really special memories. We would go there on holidays. So, a church is dressed out at the holidays, and no matter what kind of church or temple it is, it always looks better during the holidays. So I traveled there, and the door was opened miraculously by this wonderful, wonderful minister, and we sat down in the pews, and we talked about what it meant to be disconnected from God. No matter what you believe in, if you're here, you believe in something. And for me, with all of these horrific things that had happened, I had come to feel as if I didn't deserve a relationship with God, that I was shameful, that I was dirty, that somehow it wasn't okay for me to have that relationship anymore. There was also an element that felt as if God had given up on me. You know, how could you let this happen to me? How could you let this happen over and over and over again to me? And what came of that series of conversations over time throughout the night with the minister in this cathedral was, excuse me, a wonderful feeling of peace and reconnection. I think it was no error that I landed there in that tween space, because it was someplace I already had positive associations with. My connection to that space and the place and the people around it was positive. So it was probably easier for me to cross through and over into a place where I could realize, no, you know, I don't have to judge myself, and nobody judges me for what happened to me. It happened. Things happen. And that doesn't mean I can't have this relationship, that I can't be embraced in this way. So I came away from that evening of speaking with the minister, and I walked out into the light, and I journeyed back through the tween space. In my memory, of course, it was in my Ford Mustang, which I couldn't have driven if my life depended on it, since I was clinically dead at the time, and made my way home, where I looked at my body on the floor and just yanked by the crystal cord. The next thing I knew, I was in my body, and I literally lurched. I mean, if you've ever seen somebody zapped by energy or electricity and the body bounces, literally I bounced to my feet. I probably took 5 strides into the bathroom, where in fact I vomited up all of the pills that I'd taken, and at which time I looked at myself in the mirror and said, oh my God, you need to get to bed. And I laid down, and I woke up several hours later, not having remembered things that way. I didn't remember what actually happened for 32 years. So that was an interesting workshop to attend and come into that. I remember actually leaving this workshop 3 years ago and walking out. I was shaking, you know, like, oh my God, that actually happened. Oh my God, that actually happened. And there was some relief there. I mean, if I'd ever told anybody this story, they would have looked at me funny and said, you know, if you took a bottle of pills, you couldn't have driven anywhere. Even if you threw them all up, they would have had some effect. So there I was through that experience, back to 17. I make it, I wake up in the morning, I realize, because I did waken with a feeling of greater connection with God. I did waken feeling as if I can get through this. I don't have to die. This is not how my story ends. Unfortunately, 5 days later, I had a massive miscarriage, lost the child, the one good thing that I had believed that I had taken away from the experience. And I went into hiding and was able to break free from the cartel with my brother's help. And I went on to probably the next best thing I could ever imagine, which was the dean of my high school knew that there was something really different about me, and he was really intent to see me thrive. And so he got me a job interview at JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, which is NASA in Pasadena. And he said, we have this talented student. She is just straight A in physics and maths, and we really think that she'd be great with you. So Ami Gupta, who was then director for many, many years, but just had a little lab there, and he interviewed me. And at the end of the interview, he said, we'd love you to join our team. So for 4 months, I was able to go inside the little city, which requires 2 sets of gate guards to get through. And I was in this beautiful protected space where I could just focus on things that were of interest to me, and nobody could get at me, and there were security guards everywhere. And I was surrounded by some of the most bizarre people you could ever imagine. And I felt quite at home. and they had really fantastically queer ideas. And so if I said something that was a little off color, or, crazy, they'd just be looking at me like, oh, tell me more. And so I didn't feel judged anymore. And for the first time, I thought, okay, I might be okay. Like, I might have found some of my people. So Ami said to me one day, you need to go to college. And I said, well, no, I don't. I'm fine here. I'll just stay here. And he said, you're doing great, but we want you to go and be around people your own age. And I said, well, that's lovely, but I really want to stay here, please. And he said, it's okay. You can go. It's going to be all right. So I'd gotten a bunch of scholarships, and I actually set them all aside, and I decided to go to UCSD because my dad already had one kid far away, and he said, could you please stay kind of local? San Diego seemed like a good negotiation. So I went to San Diego, and I met a young man the first day, and it all seemed to just kind of work. And we became engaged, and the day of our engagement party, I was driving. I used to, when I was in that wild stage of my life, race my car for pink slips. Had a very colorful life. And so I was in my 68 Ford Mustang. I had a racing harness on, so a 5-point harness. So I was in pretty good. And he had carried this very expensive engagement party cake out of the bakery, and we were headed to the party where we were going to get changed at my mother's house and have this lovely party to celebrate our engagement. And I realized that it had just started to drizzle, but somehow that didn't connect in with me. So I was driving carefully. I was probably driving 30 miles an hour, and I saw a van coming out across us, about a block, crossing our path. And I thought, okay, slow down, the van. And as the van was making its way across, right behind it was a sports car that just didn't stop at the stop sign. And by then, I realized, good at physics, good at math, having raced cars for a living, I'm going to T-bone this car, and he's going to die, and we'll probably die, and that's going to be a bad thing. So I did what most really experienced drivers would do. I sped up. And I sped up. I cleared the entire front of his car. What I didn't think about was when I hit my brakes, the car started to spin. And it spun for 3 blocks until it hit a parked car. So there's a lot of that experience I don't remember because I think I left my body because, it was likely going to be very painful, and in fact it was. I broke the harness because of the accident. I hit the front dash, I hit the back dash, I hit the front dash again, and I came to rest on my driver's side window. And I sustained a pretty serious brain injury. So when I went back to school, I walked into my calculus class, and I was in 5th series calculus by then, and nothing made sense to me. I looked at the symbols and I thought, what are those squiggly lines? And I started to panic, so I took a little break. I went outside and I thought, it's okay, I'm just going to make my way to my physics class. And I was in the 2nd series physics class. I went in, none of it made sense. So I sustained a pretty good blow to my frontal lobe, knocked out all of my math, eventually knocked out most of my language, and knocked out my hypothalamus, so no good working hormones. I was a mess. And that was scary because I was going to medical school. And those plans went right out the window because you need math and science. That's just a thing. So I got with my dean, and I'd been, a straight A student. I'd been flying through school, got with the dean, and he sat down and he said, you need a big picture science. You've been good at big picture science. You just can't do it with math and science anymore. And, I'm in shock, I'm crying, I can't imagine how am I not going to have the life that I had set out for myself. And he said, how about with people? And I thought back to being in kindergarten, right, with the poking, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about people. It's one thing when you're doing surgery, but talking to people, full time. And he said, you're going to be great at it. So I took his advice and I started applying to graduate school, and I got into graduate school at Northwestern, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this people thing. I'm going to do this talking to people thing. I'm going to use my big picture science to look at people's problems and be able to see detail and go back and forth. I'm going to be able to do this. And I was able to do that pretty well until in my second year of graduate school, I was working hard and studying for my comps, and had been writing. They had tiny little computers called Macs back then, and a little Mac Plus, and I was writing, and I'd had some issues with just back strain. So I was in the library. I loaded up an entire bag full of books for my research. I went and I picked it up like that, and probably most of you know what happened next. I slipped a disc, and that was painful. But I was an aerobics instructor at the time. It's how I was working my way through school. And so when I went to the infirmary, I could reach all my toes. I can bend and stretch. And they said, you've just got some back strain. Take this Tylenol. It'll be fine. So the next day I got up from work, and I was nauseous and cold sweats and in a lot of pain. I went to work. Half day through, I said, I got to go home. And I went back to the infirmary and I said, this really hurts. I'm not feeling good. And they said, well, just lay on something flat. So that evening, my husband at the time helped me lay down on the ground. And mind you, I couldn't get up. Actually, he had to get me up, and that didn't seem to be working. And so the next morning when I woke up, I actually was paralyzed and couldn't move. And he quickly called the ambulance. That came, and as I'm laying there, and my friend had called miraculously. How those people that just know when to call. I think to this day she's wondering why she called at that moment, because it was bad for her and she has bad memories. But I was on the phone saying, I can't feel anything. I'm scared to death, but the ambulance is coming, so I know that's good. So I couldn't turn around to hang up the phone behind me. He'd handed me the phone, and I was holding on, and in came the EMTs, and they slid me onto this backboard, and they went ahead and put the first strap on. And that's around the time that I realized somebody was screaming in the room. And then I realized the somebody was me. And then I realized Jennifer was still on the phone. And I dropped the phone, and I realized, how come I don't know I'm screaming? And I had, again, prone to this, slid out of my body and was watching this person who couldn't feel anything but was screaming and thinking, why, this does not make sense to me. And then they cinched the second back strap on so that they could lift me up, and that was when they herniated the second and the third discs. So by the time I got to the hospital, I was unfortunately far more injured than when I started, and I compromised my spinal cord and was in hospital for quite a bit. And they just kept on saying, you're just going to have surgery because otherwise you'll never walk again. And, I was frightened. I was, 22, 23 years old. I was an aerobics instructor, and I'd already given up medical school, and I was in graduate school, and all that. And they said, all right, well, you still have some pain sensor. Your brain is still thinking it's in pain, even though you can't move. So we're going to give you Demerol. Back to the part of the story about being allergic to opiates. So, right into a coma. I was in a coma for 3 days, and I can tell you, if you ever had any curiosity about coma, yes, we can hear you. Yes, we're really aware of what's going on. It's just that we can't get into a conscious state to respond. And so God loved Jennifer. Even though I'd been screaming into the phone, she came and sat with me every day and talked to me and told me all about our colleagues in school and, the classes I was missing. And sometimes she would just read from whatever she was reading for the day for school. She'd just read to me. Maybe that helped me graduate, probably. And eventually I regained consciousness, and unfortunately was still paralyzed at the time. But it was an interesting experience because I was, I guess some people would call that an NDE, but it was really an out-of-body experience. It was an OBE. And I was constantly exposed to nursing staff who used my room as a coffee clutch because I was in a coma, so I wouldn't know the difference. Well, I didn't want to hear what they had to say, especially if it was about me or other people in and out of the room. Honestly, if you have to have a doctor and you're in the hospital, you want to think your doctor is the greatest thing, right? You don't want to know what the nursing staff thinks of your doctor. You want to be infused with confidence. And I really just took issue with the fact that they pretended I wasn't there, because I was there and I was listening to all of it, which, let me tell you, when I came out of the coma, I let them know. It turned a few heads, and there was some embarrassment, I think, about some of the stories that they'd shared, but it was proof. It was proof of the ability to be in a body, not have consciousness, and yet be aware. That idea, life after life. Yeah, no, I was still right there. My energy was still right there. So I made it through that experience, had a wonderful team that helped me with all sorts of really strange contraptions. The head of my program was married to the head of the program at Chicago Med in physical therapy, and she brought her entire student class to treat me every day. So I got to do all of these great things that they didn't have access to in the hospital where I was, and they just created a program to eventually get me on my feet. Now, get me on my feet didn't mean I could actually feel my feet, but I had a whalebone and steel corset, and then they'd prop me up. The first time they did that, I face planted. I was laughing at the time, even though it did hurt my face a little bit. And it scared them. They thought, I was going to be broken. I'm like, I'm already broken, it's fine. But slowly but surely, I regained the feeling in my feet. By the time I was actually more physically active, I'd been swimming 2 miles a day, just pulling. That's why I have these great big shoulders. They're still there. And I had started to learn something about resilience. I thought I knew before about resilience. This whole divine 2x4 therapy thing, really, I don't suggest it for anyone, but I've had many, many doses of this. So I began to learn that maybe I am more capable than I ever thought of being on this planet. Maybe there's a message here. So I really started to kind of embrace, all right, I am an Energizer bunny. I can get through this. Initially I had quite a limp, and eventually, after lots and lots of acupuncture, that went away. And I thought, I can do this. I can really do this. This is going to be okay. But part of being okay meant I had to let go of the marriage that I had. I had, for several years, thought, gosh, he's traveling a whole lot. And I'd ask him, do you have another girlfriend? Do you have another wife? Is there someone else? Because if there is, you should just go. It's fine. I'll be fine. So after this happened, and he never came to the hospital, by the way. He doesn't do hospitals. So Jennifer became my hospital buddy. And that was kind of a dead giveaway. So eventually, we came back to California, and the promise was that if I got a job in California as a psychologist, that I could begin to try to have a baby. That's all. I always wanted to be a mom. So after 2 years and $125,000 and 2 insurance policies, I was told, you can never have children. It's just not possible. Sorry. And I came home, and he pulled out 2 suitcases from behind our bed and said, good, never wanted kids, I'm out of here. So back to the Energizer bunny. I spent about 2 weeks licking my wounds, and then realized I was calmer somehow when he wasn't there anymore. And I thought, that's interesting. Well, I'm going to have a life. And I took a job offer in Tennessee, and I never thought I would go there. But I got to have a beautiful home, and I got to be all that and a piece of toast. And I started to write, and I started to publish, and I met a man. And while I wasn't thinking about getting married again, I met this man, and he was older, and he loved to travel, and then I got sick. And boy, was I sick. And I was so sick, they were getting ready to send me to the oncologist. And I thought, oh my God, here we go again, more divine 2x therapy. Except that they sent me to a reproductive endocrinologist who just did a pregnancy test my first time there. And I sat down with her, and she had my Scripps clinic record, which was about this big. And she said, well, I have your answer. And I said, you haven't even done any testing. And she said, it's okay, you're pregnant. And I said, I'm not pregnant. Have you not read my chart? And she said, it's okay, I'm going to do a scan. Ultrasound later, I'm quite far along, like 3.5 months. And I'm screaming and gleeful and cannot believe this miracle that is my daughter. And I feel transcendent, like, thank you, a gift. I was so resilient, you gave me this gift. There is something beyond the darkness. There is something for me here. And despite the fact that the medical team told me they still couldn't figure out how I'd gotten pregnant and I couldn't ever possibly become pregnant again, 6 months later, I discovered, in fact, that I was pregnant again. To which my ex-husband said, I am not interested in raising more kids. You're on your own. So a single mom with a toddler, pregnant, and I guess it could have gotten me down, but it didn't. It just kind of fueled me, like, okay, fine. I got my 2 kids. I've got a career. I can do this. I'm resilient. And I built something fantastic. And I was so proud of it. And I thought, okay, thank you, God. Like, I'm doing it. It's okay. I'm doing it. And I was minding my own business. I was on the board of the Heart Association here locally. And it was my 6th year, and the kids were growing up, and I thought, I'm good at this. Like, this is fun. And I met a man. I don't know what to say. So I met a man at a ball at Disneyland, in a ball gown, by the way. And he was quite dashing in his tuxedo. And there was this kismet connection, and fell head over heels. I think both of us. And sooner or later, we decided that we would try living together with my 2 children. And then we moved to San Diego. And right around the time he proposed, he said, would you consider having another child? Well, I was advancing to 40 then, so I said, well, if you want another kid, like, we got to get married. I'm not doing that thing again. So we got married, and the day before we got married, my endocrinologist called and said, I'm going to tell you something. Your numbers are through the roof, and we haven't changed anything. So I'm going to tell you, I think you're pregnant with twins. And I said, I'm getting married tomorrow at 5. And she said, okay, well, you might want to cut alcohol out. And I said, are you sure? And she said, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I haven't sent you to an OB to do a scan, but maybe triplets, but I'm thinking it's this many weeks and twins. So I was very careful. Apparently a few people noticed that I didn't really drink the champagne that I was toasting with, and by then, of course, the baby bump is practiced. The muscles get looser and the bump comes through earlier, and even one of my friends came through and said, oh my God, you're pregnant. Now I was pretty slender, but had this little belly bump. And I said, don't tell anybody. It's still pretty early. And she said, okay, secret's safe with me. So, and she knew twins. So, and then my best friend, Jennifer, who'd flown in to be my maid of honor, saw me across the room, came over, and she's like, oh, are you gaining weight? And I said, no. And she said, oh, maybe it's the way that dress fits. Now, Jennifer and I always had this thing about if we were either of us pregnant, that we were going to play this piece of music. And it was when we were in graduate school, we saw the movie She's Having a Baby. And Kate Bush has a song called Apron Strings. And so we went home, and Jennifer was staying with me. So we went home after the ceremony, and I walked over And I hit play. And she walks into the room and she looks at me and she burst into tears. She's like, oh my God. And I'm like, don't tell anyone. She's like, are you kidding me? And I said, it's early yet. So off we go on to our honeymoon. And we went to Mexico. We went to Cancun, and it was beautiful. And we swam and we lounged and we ate all the local fare, which probably wasn't a good thing for me because I contracted a bacteria in Mexico. So after we returned, we had gone for several scans and we'd been watching our daughter and our son. And unfortunately, poor Hope's heart just slowed down over the weeks and then stopped. And in a twin pregnancy, there is some option to resolve one sac and leave the other. It's dangerous. So the other option is to try to see what will happen just with the body naturally. And if you met my son Joe, you would believe he eats me out of house and home. No matter how many groceries I buy, he just eats them all, as do his brothers. But Joe just apparently was that kid that said, I can do this, Mom. And he simply consumed all of her DNA into his own being, and he stretched out to the 9-pound, 4-ounce baby who was delivered then, several months later. And he's at 13, 5'11", and 176 pounds. And he represents both sets of DNA in his body. So he's a little unusual. He's a big teddy bear, but all manly at the same time. So I had to manage my way of grieving the loss of a daughter, yet another daughter, and trying to just be in love with the fact that I had a new marriage and a new child and 2 other children, and it was around that time that I became pregnant with twins again. Now, to me, twins now is scary. It means somebody's going to die. And, I couldn't get rid of that feeling. I didn't even want to attach to them because I was so afraid. So at 19 weeks, I had to go on bed rest because my cervix decided it was time, and the doctor said no, because, that's not viable. And I made it until my 40th birthday, and my Nana, who raised me, died on my 40th birthday. So there I am on bed rest with my friends around me, and my mom calls to tell me my Nana has died. And I think it was probably just too much. I was at 30 weeks. I made it another 2 days, and then I went into a full abruption. I made it to the hospital, which was great because I would have absolutely not been here to talk to you today if I hadn't. But, I just felt like I had the flu, felt bad, and they said, go ahead and go get checked. So I got there, and they went to examine me, and I thought, where is the waterfall coming from? And I started to move out of my body, I think. Prone to it, right? And I realized, no, there's not water on. And then I thought, did my water break? And it came out of my mouth, did my water break? And the doctor said, no. And then I remember her like in slow motion. I remember her head turning, and I remember her screaming to the staff, prep an OR. And I thought, ooh, that's not good. And I remember my husband was sitting at the side, and he was eating a sandwich or something, and I remember him looking at the floor and not picking his head up. And I thought, oh, something bad is happening. And I knew at 30 weeks it was going to be dangerous to deliver the twins anyway. But I thought, okay, I know people who've delivered from 21 weeks on, so it's okay. I'm going to be okay-ish. So into the OR, last thing I remember was seeing this anesthesiologist's eyes. And they were crystal blue. Like when I say crystal blue, I mean like the azure, so incredibly bright and vibrant, weird. It left me with this weird feeling like, who are you? And I said, oh no, this is bad. And his eyes just got big and then lights out. And then apparently that's when I flatlined. Unbeknownst to me, in my conscious mind, one of my twins had already drowned in the process, flatlined, and they were now crash C. It's called a rip C, and they were attempting to remove the twins and make sure everybody was good before bringing me back. But what I remember was suddenly being on this dark road. And in Tennessee, I guess you come across these country roads pretty often. They're big, wide roads, but very rural, kind of lined with trees and then fields on either side. And suddenly I was on this dark country road and like moving as fast as you would if you were driving a car, but there was no car. And that was when I realized, oh my God, I'm dead. God, I've got to stop doing this. I'm dead. Why am I dead? What's going on? And moving so fast. And then this panic coming over me. And I realized, oh my God, the twins. Where are the twins? Where are the twins? And searching and feeling frantic and frantic and frantic. And just literally, like there's no breath, no air. Everything has stopped except I'm hurtling through space and time, desperately trying to find one twin. Excuse me. And suddenly, this time no crystal cord, thank you very much. Little zap. And I was awake, and I heard that thing again. Thank God Jennifer was not on the phone for this one, screaming and trying to understand who the hell is screaming that's so loud, and realizing, I gotta stop learning to do this. It was me. And I then became completely hysterical, and in swoops my husband, and he said, it's okay, they're here. But I was like, what? And he moved my face, and here's an isolette, and I could hardly see them, honestly. They were teeny tiny, the size of Coke cans, and all wrapped up with tubes and tape and oxygen, and they were getting ready to be life-flighted to another hospital. And I saw that both of them were breathing, and I thought, okay. I was like, check 1, check 2, check 3, we're alive, okay. All right, I can do this, everybody's alive. If you met them today, any of my children, you would say like, oh my God, anybody had any episodes? They started how little? They're huge. They're all great. And other than the fact that my son Kyle, who was the DOA baby, Kyle and I have a very different relationship than other moms and their kids. He and I came through together. He's an odd guy. You know, I got to keep on just directing him forward because I know what it's like to be that odd guy. And he's different because he came back. I think he set his own person aside. And my grandmother died, right, just 2 days before they came into the world. They were in the NICU for almost 3 months. And my grandfather died just after they came back out of the NICU. They came out with meds and monitors, and Kyle could not hold a heart rate, could not. I was in there doing CPR so many times a day. I can't tell you what that's like to try to live when you know your kid is dying over and over and over again, just because he just can't do it. He didn't have it. And my grandfather died, and within 8 hours, Kyle held a heart rate. Weird. And then they took him off the monitors and the medication. They said, he's all good. So when he was little, he started doing this. So my grandfather was the foremost researcher on pancreatic cancer. He was still consulting into his 90s. He died at 92. He'd written so many papers. 5 years after his death, they were still doing memorial services as part of pancreatic cancer conferences. And he was really quite beloved, and he was an incredible guy. He was probably one of my best mentors ever. And so Kyle, at about 4 years old, came in, and he was learning to use a comb, and he did my grandfather's comb over. And I thought, I've seen that guy before. He was taller. And then about a week later, he came in and he said, Mom, they've really got to start thinking about the pancreas different. And I said, what'd you say, honey? And he said, what, Mommy? And I looked at him, I said, you were talking about the pancreas? And he said, what? Pancake? Did you say pancakes? We're having pancakes? And I said, no, that's okay. It happened so many times where he would come in and he'd start talking about a theory, and then I'd ask him, and then his eyes would change, and I'd think, oh, I've got him, yay! Okay, how's this going to be growing up in a little body when you're 90, when you're this guy? Well, lo and behold, my other twin totally reincarnated my grandmother. She was quite a mischief maker, even though she was British, and it would all be like behind the scenes. She was quite mischievous as a kid, and that kid may be the death of me, actually. He is so mischievous, bright, whippersnapper, great with other people, but a mischief maker. And I firmly know in my heart, I've got my grandparents living in my home again. And they happen to be in little twin boy bodies. And it's another reminder to me every single day. Life doesn't stop. It doesn't. Excuse me. It just goes on and on. So you'd think that I was done with the story, and I am almost done with the story. But back to that opiate allergy. So every chart that's ever been taken about me, the front of it in red letters says opiate allergy, deadly opiate allergy. Every time I have to go into the hospital, I have a red band. It's not black with red writing, it's red. It says allergic to opiates. So after about 5 years, after the twins' birth, I could not get up from the bed by myself because in a RIP-C, they just go through all of the abdominal muscles. So in a normal pregnancy and birth, they would go ahead and repair those so you could get up and down. And so finally, the back surgeon, because my back was getting worse and worse, said, I think we need to go in and repair your abdominal muscles. And when I got in to do the surgery, they needed to do a hysterectomy, and there was nothing to attach to. Thank God for the surgeon who was a plastic surgeon who got some mesh and said, I can rebuild her. $6 million bionic woman. And in it went. And for the first time in many, many years, I could sit up from my bed on my own. I could carry my kids. And I really started feeling like, okay, this is going to be okay. Well, during that surgery, God love the anesthesiologist. It was my blue-eyed anesthesiologist who came in to be present, knew how to keep me alive. But when I woke up, because they did know, right, that I'm allergic to opiates, I woke up in a lot of pain because 700 stitches is a lot of stitches. And they wanted to give me something to relieve my pain. So they quickly gave me a good IV dose of opiates. And I don't remember that ND because that was a quick flatline. And that scared them. Actually, I got to see the scared faces of nursing staff. And, then they had to hurry to call the doctor, and he gave them another opiate to try. So that was the second round. It was after the third round that I kind of regained the ability to speak as I was coming to again. And I screamed, no opiates. And they're like, look, if you're 12-stepping, it's gonna be okay. You'll wash this out. I said, I'm allergic. Up came the red band. And they were, I think there were 4-letter words going on actually in their room. And their eyes went this big, and they ran for the ice. And they started packing me in ice and said, okay, we won't give you anything more. This is gonna hurt. And it did hurt for about 3 months. But they stopped giving me opiates. Now I'm really thinking about a tattoo. It might even have to go across the front of my face. It should certainly go somewhere on the closed part of my body that just says no opiates, so that if I go in for any form of surgery, have any medical emergencies, never again, no opiates. Because this isn't how my story ends, because I'm not ready to let go. I've got more stuff to do. And like coming here and talking about what it's like to go over and through that tween space and back so many times, it's really invigorated both my relationship with my God, with my children, with my family, and with being on the planet and connecting to other people. My big picture science really is people and connecting with people one by one and with groups, and to bring the message of hope. Doesn't matter how different you are. It's all good. We're all different. and we're all connected. And that's what I have to share with you today.
Thank you so much.